Engaging strengths. In the previous chapters, we've been talking about leadership in ways that may not always be applicable to you. Various leadership approaches, philosophies, traits, styles, theories, and types of behavior. Chances are there are some things you've identified in yourself and others you haven't. While I've encouraged you to apply the subjects in each chapter to yourself, it's been a little impersonal. We've talked about leaders in general, not so much about your individual leadership qualities. Today that changes quite a bit. We are going to focus on your own strengths, and all of you may bring a different combination of strengths to the table. I hope that you're getting pretty good at predicting at least some of the study guide questions by now. Since you've read the chapter, you did the Vantage activities, I bet you're ready for some study guide questions focusing on strengths, and we won't disappoint. So after you've read chapter 6 and watch it to the lecture, you should be able to define what a strength is and how it's different from a trait or a skill. Identify the 4 domains of leadership strengths, know what 3 CAPP criteria for assessing strengths are, and be able to discuss the 4 quadrants of the 4M model and what they say about strengths and weaknesses. I think there's a little more jargon this week than normal. So before we dive into what this quote says, let's look at who said it. So does Clifton sound familiar? Well, if you were in the BCOM sequence here at UT Dallas when we had this, then it should, because many of you took the Clifton Strengths Finder as part of the course or a lab. You may have encountered it as other courses as well. So I know some courses use it for forming teams, others for talking about applying for different positions. You've already done some prep work here. If you can find those results, it's a great idea to pull them back up. One of the things that's interesting to me is how those develop and evolve while you're an undergraduate student. So Clifton says, quote, "A leader needs to know his strengths as a carpenter knows his tools or as a physician knows the instruments at her disposal. What great leaders have in common is that each truly knows his or her strengths and can call on the right strength at the right time," unquote. Keep this in mind as we go through the chapter. Your strengths are like the tools in your toolkit, but like a carpenter or a doctor, you have to know how and when to use those tools. It's essential to being effective as a communicator and as somebody who's a supervisor. It's not enough to know you have a strength. It's not enough to just own a power saw or a scalpel. You have to know how and when and where to use them. So what's the strengths approach? Each one of us has identifiable leadership strengths, areas where you are going to excel, and oftentimes though we can fail to recognize those strengths. So as a result, many times our strengths are used ineffectively or not at all. Identifying individual strengths is a unique challenge because people often feel hesitant and inhibited about acknowledging positive aspects of themselves. In a few cultures, expressing positive self-attributes is often seen as boastful or self-serving. So I don't know about you, but when I was growing up here in Texas, I was often taught it was not proper to, cliche says, toot my own horn, which means to brag about yourself. To the point where still I'll have moments where I know it would be really awkward for me to walk into I wouldn't do this anyways, but if you were to go into a group and just acknowledge, hey, I'm pretty intelligent, or hey, I'm a really fast reader, and I've got evidence to prove that. My dissertation was about books that were like 1,000 pages long, so I know I'm a good reader, but still saying I'm a good reader seems weird. Right? Does it seem weird to hear that from me? And I'm not alone in this. Focusing on oneself is disdained in a lot of different cultures, while showing humility and being self-depreciating can be seen sometimes as virtuous, and all that makes me... I'm like uncomfortable saying it. So before we go any further talking about strengths, let's define the term. A strength is an attribute or a quality of an individual that accounts for successful performance. It's the characteristic or series of characteristics that we demonstrate when our performance is at its best. Strengths are positive features of ourselves that make us effective and help us flourish. So these strengths may sound like a little bit like we talked about in earlier chapters with traits and skills. So how do they relate to that? Traits are characteristics of people that are often inherited. It's a bit of review there. In the case of strengths, these traits are being engaged at their highest level. And how about skills? Skills are learned competencies. Everyone can be taught skills. Strengths are expressions of a pre-existing capacity and are unique to each person. A skill can become a strength. Alex Lindley outlined the strengths approach in this way in his 2008 book, Average to A+, Realizing Strengths in Yourselves and Others. 1, you want to focus on what's going well and what's working. This is unique because often the focus is on weaknesses and how to improve them. So, for example, a class where you think about, what do I not know? What do I need to know? This is different. This is thinking about what's going well. What do you know? How can we take that further? The second point here is that everyone has strengths. It's part of human nature, and everyone deserves respect for their individual strengths. The third one is that our strengths are our greatest area of potential. We have to be able to recognize them to maximize them, and when maximized, it can be huge. To succeed, we need to address weaknesses, but only when we are also maximizing strengths. Again, the focus is on strengths, and then look at the weaknesses after. This is a really different approach than maybe what you've seen before. And then finally, using our strengths is the smallest thing we can do to make the biggest difference. I love that quote. So thinking here, this is a big change from maybe where we've been before to thinking about, what are you good at? How can you make it and yourself even better? So we know, or at least from the research, we know that there are several keys to becoming a more effective leader. There's a book on strengths-based leadership called literally Strengths-Based Leadership, published in 2008. It's in the UT Dallas Library if you're interested. But in that book, the two authors talk about a study where they reviewed 20,000 interviews with leaders and surveyed 10,000 of their followers. And this is a global study, which is really cool. So in that study, they asked people why they followed the most influential leader in their life. From those studies, they identified 3 keys to being an effective leader. First, the most effective leaders are always investing in strengths, not just their own strengths, but the strengths of their employees as well, both individuals and as teams. The strengths here in these studies are still being looked into, but research has generally shown that when people are able to use their strengths at work, they report significantly higher job satisfaction. And this is the fun quote, income levels. So 25 years later, this is a longitudinal study. They looked and found the people who used their strengths made more money. So as a leader, know your strengths. It's good as well to help people who follow you learn theirs as well. They will make more money too. It sounds really capitalistic of me, but this is really important. That ebook that I just mentioned goes into so much depth on it. The second is that the most effective leaders surround themselves with the right people and then maximize their team. Leaders who focus on employee strengths increase employee engagement and gains for the organization. It's not just about the strength of the individual, but the synergistic effect of the combined strengths of the individuals that make up teams. The top performing teams have strengths in 4 domains. They're multifaceted rather than one-sided. Coming right back to that in the 4 domains. Third, the most effective leaders understand their followers' needs. So it's not the focus of this lecture, but I do want to notice there was a Gallup survey of 10,000 followers that, again, in that book it talks about it more. And they asked followers to describe the leader with the most positive influence on their daily life in 3 words. The 4 most popular answers were trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Does that sound familiar? It echoes what we've been talking about in other aspects of leadership. Remember relationship-oriented leadership behaviors from the last chapter, where relationship behaviors by a leader were described as supporting and developing followers from that gained greater employee satisfaction and potentially better employee performance. This is one way that kind of support and development might look and why an effective leader will engage in it. But before we dive more deeply into our discussion of leadership strengths, I want to pause for a moment and focus on this quote from, again, that book about strengths. And the 2 authors write, although individuals need not be well-rounded, teams should be. As we go through the domains and their associated strengths, don't think about these things only in terms of your individual strengths, but about the strengths of a group. An effective leader knows when to call on strengths of other people in the team. Maybe you've already experienced this for yourself in group projects. One person does a great job, the team leader managing the project, dividing up the parts, making sure everyone turns in their parts, but one person steps forward in the end game to edit the entire written portion to make it consistently formatted, consistent in person and voice, because they're the strongest writer on the team. That's strength there. Or maybe everybody contributes basic slides, but one person who has a real strength with visual design and or using PowerPoint does the sort of same thing, polishes them, takes it up to the next level. That's a way you can have, even at a really simplistic level, a strength development issue. Well, this table should look familiar. This is straight out of your book where it goes through the 34 talent themes. You might also remember this from when, if you've taken StrengthsFinder, you did that. Our textbook is looking at several different approaches to strengths. These listings are drawn from the one you're most familiar with, I'm going to assume, which is Gallup's research that identified the qualities of high-performing individuals. From there, they distilled this down into 34 patterns or themes they thought did the best job of explaining excellent performance. These are the strengths. You'll see them listed here. And if you really remember way back, I know many of you did this when you were in your first semester at UT Dallas, but a strengths finder defines a strength as a talent times an investment. So it's a mathematical formula here. Talent times investment equals strength. From the book and when you took StrengthsFinder, you know there's 4 domains of leadership strengths which help you interpret your profile. So executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. The book mentions that these are the 4 kinds of strengths that help develop and create successful teams. However, teams are not always designed. And as a student, I'm sure you've experienced this. In the workplace, executive teams are often formed by who has knowledge of something or who has competence. Smartest IT person, in theory, becomes CIO. And in other times, teams are formed where people act and think like each other, formed by similarity, not by strengths or diverse ability. So effective teams should have strengths in each domain. This leads to a strong, cohesive team, but usually people will have strengths in multiple domains. Again, that's what makes teams well-rounded. So let's do a really brief run through of the 4 domains. So executing is knowing how to make things happen. So individuals with these skills implement solutions well. So establishing a quality process using themes like deliberative or discipline. Or a leader will use the achiever theme to work towards a goal. Or another leader with stronger ranger might determine the optimal configuration of people needed to complete a task. Influencing means helping the team reach people beyond the team. So it's like inside as well as external to the organization. So a leader with a lot of command or self-assurance might use few words, but their confidence will continue to project authority and win followers. In contrast, a leader using communication or woo might get people involved by helping individuals feel comfortable and connected to the issue at hand. With relationship building, these individuals keep the team cohesive. They foster harmony and bonding. So individuals with skills in this domain might work together to minimize distractions. If it's positivity or harmony, keep the team's energy high. A leader with strong relator or developer might be a great mentor and guide as he pushes others towards bigger and better achievements. And finally, strategic thinking. So these are individuals who keep people focused on possibilities in the future and help with decision making. So within this domain, a leader using context or strategic might help explain how past events influence present circumstances or navigate the best route for future possibilities. Can you see how you might not have all of these strengths in one individual? In fact, you probably would not. It's really rare, based on what I've seen for everybody enrolled at UT Dallas, for anyone to be all in one category. But people with strengths from different domains make much better and more effective moves as an organization. The book mentions several other different approaches to strengths. I'm not going to cover all of them, but instead I just want to juxtapose StrengthsFinder with CAPP, so the CAPP, Center of Applied Positive Psychology. From CAPP's perspective, strengths were conceptualized as the things that we're good at and give us energy when we're using them, not focusing exclusively on the identification of a specific number of strengths. CAPP researchers created a more dynamic model of strengths that emphasizes the changing nature of strengths. They also examine different kinds of strengths and weaknesses. So the central elements you're going to see here are performance, energy, and use. They're looking at about 60 different strengths in relation to 3 dimensions of energy, performance, and use. Information in black below in each CAPP section is from a 2010 interview with with the consulting director of CAPP. So we want you with this research to think about looking at developing strengths because it's a more way to attain positive gains. So the model from this interview is all about identifying weaknesses and stresses, knowing them well, and knowing what you can do with them. But you're not trying to develop your weaknesses. Now, if a weakness is critical to performance in business, you need to think about it, but we're generally more satisfied in our jobs if we use strengths. So you want to move from a role or position you won't excel into one where you do. So this CAPP approach is represented with this strengths profiler quadrant model, which is kind of a mouthful. So realized strengths are going to be things that represent our strongest assets. You find them energizing, you do them a lot, so you should probably know right away if I say, what do you like doing? You're going to come back with this. Unrealized strengths are personal attributes that are less visible. It's energizing, you're good at it. Maybe you've run across this in your own life. You have to give a presentation for class and you like getting dressed up and nailing a presentation, that endorphin rush. Learned behaviors are going to be ingrained things we've learned throughout our life experience. So something you potentially perform well, but you should moderate its use because it drains your energy. So maybe you're good at addressing disputes at work, but it causes you to lose sleep at night, so you don't look forward to doing it. Weaknesses are our limited attributes, so they often drain our energy and result in poor performance. So this is great, but how does this work at work? Well, Aviva, this is a British multinational insurance company, uses this in their recruiting. So they noticed they were paying a high cost for each person in customer service hired and had a lot of turnover. So they found that they could recruit people based on strengths instead of experience, and they found those people tended to stay longer, were more productive, and had higher customer feedback. But how do you know? So maybe I went through that list and you're like, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know where my strengths are. Well, they can just look so different, and we all have unique personality traits, therefore we all have unique strengths. Now, probability suggests that if there is at least one of you watching me now thinking, well, what if you had no strengths? No one is without them. There's a psychologist, Howard Gardner. His idea is that extraordinary individuals are distinguished less by their impressive raw power than by their ability to identify their strengths and then exploit them. So maybe at this point you're asking yourself, well, how do I know? The book recommends the following. So StrengthsFinder, I know you took as a student, that's also available. It's about $50. There's others that are sometimes available. The one in our book is developed by the author, and that's actually pretty solid. There's leadership strengths questionnaires you can do. There's a RBSC is called Reflected Best Self exercise. A lot of this is explained in the book. And several others I'm not even going to go into. So listed on the slide are some other intuitive ways beyond these traditional measures. So usually a strength is a feeling of energy, engagement coupled with what they call flow sometimes. So the idea that you can lose sense of time passing if you're doing something you really like. It's that sweet spot like you might get with a video game where you just don't notice how much time is going by. Rapid learning, you get it really fast. You have repeated successful performance. You find it like really solid, easy, good to complete tasks, an attraction to tasks or pleasure from completing and performing tasks. Our leadership capability is enhanced when we're able to discover our fully utilized strengths, underutilized strengths, and weaknesses. Discovering your strengths requires you to concentrate on your positive attributes in those times when you feel inspired. To do so, you need to pay attention to your successes rather than focusing on weaknesses and failures. Now, if you've ever tried to develop your physical strength, you know you can't just walk into a gym for the first time and bench your body weight, or run a 5K, or knock out 100 pull-ups, and if you can, you're amazing, I hate you. That's really impressive. But developing your leadership strengths is also a multifaceted process that involves several steps. You need to acknowledge your strengths and be prepared to reveal them to others. This is hard, but telling them others about your strengths is important because it lets them know how you can be useful when working, when collaborating, when clarifying contributions. Disclosing strengths declares, here's what I can bring to the table. Here's what you can expect from me. And this can be really critical when you're working on a team. Now, pause there real quick though. If you disclose a strength and you say, my strength is Excel, when really, not so much, that can backfire in a huge way. So it's important to truly assess and also get feedback from others on what you're good at. So is anybody feeling uncomfortable with this idea of, say, adding strengths to an email signature? Well, yeah. As we've discussed, some of us come from cultures where saying positive things about our skills, blowing our horns, is frowned upon. This is something to be aware of if you're communicating across cultures in particular. Expressing and communicating our strengths has a cultural element. Whether or what one culture may see as a strength that should be revealed, another could even see as a weakness. So you need to practice working consistently with others based on your strengths. Like a muscle, you need to keep working your strengths up to keep them up. If your strength is being an innovator, find ways to be creative in leadership. If your strength is that you're deliberative, put yourself in a position where your strength is providing structure or order to a project. A good example is Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in the world. He's known for patience, practicality, trustfulness. And he used those three strengths, so patience, practicality, and trustfulness, to make Berkshire Hathaway successful. All right, so I mentioned just a second ago, and let's focus in on this, good leaders and strong communicators not only recognize and capitalize strengths, but can identify weaknesses and address them too. Acknowledging and understanding your weaknesses can allow you to work to improve them and to recognize situations where your weaknesses can be a liability to your leadership. To continue the physical strength metaphor, maybe you want to do pull-ups, but you have weak back muscles. You've been focusing on biceps, triceps, your pecs, but those are the ones you see in the mirror. But if you want to knock out pull-ups, you need to focus on your back. Working to improve those will not only help your pull-ups, but will have other benefits like back pain reduction. And that'll be more critical as you get older. So working to improve your weaknesses can have similar benefit. Another way to address weaknesses, especially ones that can't be easily improved, is to use them as opportunities for others to contribute their strengths, and that can improve your leadership. Leaders need to recognize and engage the strengths of their followers. I know we've been talking a lot about you, yourself, and I. Let's just switch for a second. So you need to determine what your followers are good at doing and help them do it. Strengths of followers are not always evident to leaders or even to the followers themselves. This becomes a challenging situation because leaders need to ascertain followers' strengths from what they observe rather than what followers explicitly express to them. Followers may have strengths that are not observable because their situations don't allow for their many facets of their overall abilities to emerge. High-performing teams and work groups possess strengths in 4 domains: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. I'm repeating that from earlier. When leaders become aware of their followers' strengths as well as their own, they can use this information to design work groups that have individuals with strengths representing each domain. Complementary strengths, that means a team is built with complementary strengths in mind. Teams, by their nature, will do things that individuals and non-complementary teams can't. This can raise some issues. If you're pulling too many people with complementary strengths, you need to be sure that you still have a common vision, aligned incentives, and close communication in order to have a synergistic effect. So work climate and physiological impact. Research suggests that when employees have the opportunity to engage their strengths, they are more productive and more loyal, and their companies experience less turnover. So in short, people feel better and work better when the climate in which they work is positive. So how does a leader go about making that positive climate? By attending to 4 areas. To create a positive climate, leaders should foster among their employees virtues like compassion, forgiveness, gratitude. To build positive relationships, leaders need to highlight individuals' positive images and strengths rather than their negative images and weaknesses. To develop positive communication, leaders must be supportive, make more positive than negative statements, and be less negatively evaluative of others. And leaders must or can foster positive meaning in their organizations by emphasizing the connection between employees' values and the long-term impact of their work. There has to be some kind of meaning. A lot of these topics are in chapters to come where we are going to talk more about visions, talk more about crisis, and especially in chapter 8, talk more about the idea of climate and meaning. So I'd encourage you to take some time to look at these questions, not just in studying for the test, but also think about how the material can apply to your life. All of us have strengths that help us as leaders and as part of a team. Understanding what strengths are, how we can best use them alone and as part of a team, and what the strengths are of all of your team members and followers can help us make informed and effective decisions and communication strategies as leaders and as employees.